I want to welcome you to the EFCA West Wednesday webinar. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dean Maeda, and I'm the lead pastor of Nova Community Church in Torrance. And I'm the part-time director of church multiplication for EFCA West. And, as the director of church multiplication, I'm here to develop church planters. So we recruit and we'll assess and we'll train and we'll coach church planters. And then I'm here to help EFCA West churches envision and create a culture of multiplication and to help them if they want to plant a church. We have churches planting churches, and we're developing church planting residencies and multiplication strategies and all those things. I wanted to come on today and we're going to have the crew from Amango Day in Downey, California, just talk to us about some of the things that I learned. Now, a couple weeks ago, I took a field trip to Downey, California. It's about 35 or 40 minutes from where I'm at in Torrance. And I met with Daniel Jansen, DJ, and Guillermo Parra, and Eric Hernandez. And it was the greatest day. We were in Downey, and we went to, I forgot what the place was called. It was a meat market. What do they call that in Spanish? Like carniceria? Is that what it's called? And we picked up some burritos. They were 18-hour Chipotle smoked beef brisket burritos. And we picked up these burritos and we went to Southgate Park, which is nearby. And we sat on some picnic tables there underneath these huge trees, and we ate those burritos, and they told me stories of Southeast LA County, and it was just the greatest time. And then I said, hey, take me around. And so we jumped in a car, and they drove me all around, and we drove through neighborhoods, and they talked to me about the people, and we went to different cities in Southeast LA County: Cudahy, Bell, Huntington Park, Southgate. I mean, we just drove around and they told me stories of people and of these cities and of Southeast LA County. And I was so inspired by that. I want you to hear the stories from DJ, Amango Day folks in Southeast LA County. And so these guys are here on the screen with us. And my hope is this, is that in hearing these stories, that you would think and that you would reflect on the community that God's called you to. And one thing we're going to do today is we're going to learn about what's called the local predicament. And some of you know what that is because you've been trained in church unique things and church planting. But the local predicament is a specific localized way to look at the community that you've been called to, and to think about that community and how that community hurts and how it bleeds and how lost people would come to know the gospel. And so we'll do all that today in our time. I want you to meet DJ a little bit and some of his staff. But DJ, why don't you introduce yourself and just begin by telling us how you came to know Jesus. How about that?
Yeah, my name is DJ. And I'm here, this is Memo, who's the other pastor at Amango Day. This is Eric, who leads the Spanish church, Mira. And this is Edwin, who's our youth director. And then also on the call is Cassandra Medina. I see she's our director of operations. And Nick Ranieri is here. That's good, Nick.
What's up, Nick?
Right.
But yeah, in terms of how I came to know Jesus, I grew up, kind of a classic story. I grew up in a nominal Christian home, and I grew up in an EV-free church. I grew up at Grace EV-free in La Mirada, and my story is that church and my family both fell apart around the same time when I was in junior high. That church, was depleted from a few hundred down to maybe 30, 40 people, had some drama. And then my family My mom went into a deep depression. My dad's parents, his dad passed away, so he was taking care of his mom a lot. So he's kind of latchkey kid. And what happened is that church began to experience some revitalization when I was around somewhere in high school. And as it did that, they really took me and my brothers in and discipled us and honestly shared the good news of Jesus in a fresh way when I was a freshman in high school. And I know I'd grown up around the church, had no concept really of the greatness and vastness of our God and the need of redemption. I thought I was a pretty good kid. And I just remember, in early teenage years, just becoming just exposed to my need for grace and the beauty of Christ, that he saved me. And then the beautiful thing is for my brothers and I, even though we were in a broken home, we got caught up in a church revitalization and got discipled in that, in kind of those formative years. And God really put in each of us a passion for the gospel, a passion for the lost. And somewhere in late high school, early college, through the preaching of our church, going through the book of Acts, the faithful ministry of the pastors there and caring for us, really had so I don't know how to describe it exactly. I mean, a call to ministry where it wasn't just like, oh, I need Jesus. It was, there was a pressing upon my own heart for the nations, for those who don't know Christ, and that God was calling me to preach, to lead, to do, to serve. I mean, just in any capacity to see his name.
That's awesome. How about your calling to church planting? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that happened when I was 18. I didn't call it church planting because I didn't know that's what it was. But teaching through the book of Acts, I was captivated by that, watching the gospel transform cities, like not just individual lives, but transform whole people groups, and that was just something that was in my head. I think I get this from my dad. It's not necessarily like he doesn't do it from a church planting mindset, but he was always teaching me to look at cities. So like whenever we would drive around, he's like, he can't help himself but point out businesses and shops that he's been at and things that, and so I just, anytime I go to a city I've never been in or a place I've never been, I'm always observing, what are the shops, where are people gathering, what's kind of people doing here? And then as we preach through Acts, and that just began to grip my life, I began to do that through a gospel lens. And so honestly, from the time I was 18, 19, just anywhere I'd go, I'd start thinking about what would it look like for a church to be here? What would it look like to reach these people? And sometimes I'd have a creative idea and sometimes I'd have no clue. And that was just kind of like, where that came.
I love it. I love it. Hey, tell us a little bit about Amango Day. Now, Amango Day is just celebrating what I think, is it 5 years?
Yeah,
5 years. Awesome. I remember when I assessed, our assessment team assessed you and Krista, and I think you were carrying a baby around with you that was a toddler that was crawling around under the table, and what a great time that was. But tell us a little bit about Amango Day, because right around that time, that Amango Day in Downey, you had a twinkle in your eye about that area. So tell us about Amango Day.
Yeah. Well, that baby that was crawling around is now the oldest of 5. So that's the last few years. But Amango Day really was, I'll try to say this quick, but so there's this kind of general idea, but my life was mostly Orange County based growing up. I grew up in like the last city of Los Angeles County, and then kind of headed south a little bit towards Orange County, which I don't know how familiar everyone is with Orange County. And then when I met my wife, her dad was a pastor in the city of Bell, which is inner city, Southeast LA. And I got brought in there to lead worship and do youth ministry, and did that for 7 years. And through that, God gave just a heart for that area, which I think I'll share a little bit more. But then there began to be this seed of, okay, what would it look like to plant a church in this area that could plant other churches to reach this area? And I'd read some books, I'd been to seminary, but I really had no clue. And God providentially put Anthem Church in Ventura County, which is another EV-free church, in my path, just random meetings. And they invited me to do a church planting residency. So in 2014, we moved out and did that. And it was a quasi parachute plan. So when we were sent out from the church we were at, it's an inner city church of about 100 people. And they just sent me and my wife out, and they pledged $400 a month to us. And that was a huge sacrifice from their budget. And we moved into a back house in Thousand Oaks, did a 9-month residency. And then in the process of that, we moved back into the city of Downey, where we just started gathering. This is why I say it's quasi-parachute. It was a parachute because we were the only ones that were sent out. But then we're from the area. And so we kind of reached out to people that we knew that were disconnected from church, that were not following Jesus, and tried to offer a compelling vision of the gospel and community, and started gathering people then. And so that was 5.5 years ago that we started doing some of that. And then we formally launched in October 2015. Amango Day means image of God, which we're able to speak then to a diversity of people who are present here and tell them that they're made in the image of God. It's a very religious area, heavy Catholic presence, and able to speak to people that it's not just religion, it's not just empty practices, but the idea of Amango Day. You can see our wall behind us, behold, become, display, that everyone worships and beholds something, and that what you worship shapes who you are, and you display that out for your good or for your ruin. And so you're made in the image of God to behold, become, display his glory. But if you also worship other things, you become like that. You worship money, you become greedy, you display that out, and that puts you under the judgment of God. So it's just an avenue to speak truth and life, but also, to bring the gospel. So I don't know if that's quite what you're asking me. That was 5 years ago.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's so interesting. And just the idea of Southeast LA County and Downey and things. Just describe, maybe it's a couple things about Downey. I know that isn't the original McDonald's in Downey or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the second McDonald's ever. So it's the longest standing McDonald's.
And is it still there?
It's still there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you can just come to Downey with us. So I guess fast food. It is also one of the first churches. I mean, in Los Angeles, Protestant churches was out here. So Downey has a long history in LA. And it is what you might consider to be we call it a second generation city. And so a lot of the immigrant population in Los Angeles moves to Southeast LA. And as they get established, the second generation, third generation moves in Downey. And so as a church planner, you do all the statistics. What's interesting about Downey is in 1990, it was 70% white in population. And then in 2010, it was 70% Hispanic, Latino. A completely different city today than it was just a few years ago. And we are the only church plant in this city of 115,000 within the last 10 years.
Wow.
So that's it's a completely new city that's also a very historic city.
Yeah.
And it's bordered, and this is kind of talking a little bit about Southeast LA, but it's bordered by 4 freeways. So it kind of connects us to all of Los Angeles and Southern California. And it's I don't know how to describe it. It's like, it's not urban. I mean, I could take you to some urban places in terms of when you think of, well, when you think of urban connotatively, not denotatively, it is urban in a denotative, in like a literal sense in terms of population density. But it's not like, we don't really have a crazy gang problem here, or it's not hood or anything like that. But yeah, also when you think suburban, you're probably more thinking some of the Orange County places, or kind of outside. So it's somewhere in the middle of those two worlds.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, let's do this. So let's get in some breakout groups, and Sochi's gonna break us out into some groups. What I want you to do in those groups is, first thing I want you to do is just introduce yourself. If you don't know everybody, just introduce yourself, what church you're from, and then describe to the group what your community's like, the community that you're called to. Tell the story of that community in just a few words. And maybe some of you need to sort of define the boundaries of your community, because I don't know if we always think, oh, this is the community I'm called to, but start to begin to think, maybe not just a city, or maybe it's a region, or maybe it's a neighborhood. But get into breakout groups, introduce yourself, and then describe the community that you're called to. And we'll do that. Your groups are probably going to be 2 or 3 people, and take about 3 minutes to do that. And then we're going to talk more about our communities in another breakout in a little bit. But let's do that. Let's just start talking about our communities and describe that to your breakout group. So Sochi, take us away into a 10-minute breakout. Well, I'm glad that you had some breakout time to talk about what your communities are like. I think it's always good to think about your community and talk about it, and just reflect on it and see what the people are like out there. We had some good discussion in our breakout from all of that. You know, I think one of the challenges sometimes is when we think about our communities, we don't always know what the stories are, or really the fullness of what our community is about. And I thought we just, for the whole group, just have a discussion and just answer the question of, what are some ways? So think about it. I want you to think about, what are some ways that you can learn more about your community? What are some ways that you can learn the stories of the community that you're called to? And let's just sort of brainstorm, or let's talk about different ways that we can learn about what our communities, what comprises our communities, and the people and the history and things like that. How do we go about doing that? So let's just kind of have an open discussion with this large group here. What are ways you can learn of the stories of the community that you're called to? Is there anybody out there? David, go ahead.
For me, when I moved here, I went to the barber shop, which not literally the barber shop, but I went to the place in town where everyone, and that's your Starbucks, your coffee shop in our culture. And I would just work from there 2 or 3 days a week and just hang out, just listen to the baristas, just listen to the conversations, develop relationships. And then you kind of get the story, you start hearing the story of what's currently, and then you can ask questions. Our community is so new relatively that there's not a huge history to have to learn, and it's so transient, but still to hear the stories of what people are wrestling with, and it helped not just that piece, but sermon preparation, illustrations, hitting at what people are wrestling with, just that was, for me, was really helpful.
That's great. And you're from Bullhead City. Great. Anybody else out there? How do you learn the stories of your community?
I'm in Monterey Park there, and I think for me, when I first got to church, I've been there for almost 4 years now. But just talking with the community partners there, we had meetings with the city council, mayor, the police department that was arranged by one of the groups there called Callus SUV. But having those kind of dialogues and conversations understanding the brokenness of the community, but how we can partner together. I think that's, I got a real, starting to, those help me get a really good, strong feel for, I think, what God is trying to do. So.
That's great. How about you, Bill? You're church planting in Madera Church near Tucson. Tell us about, and you've been there how long in Tucson, Bill?
Just a little over a year now.
Okay, so you've had to do some sort of research on Madera or at the Tucson area. How did you go about that? How did you go about learning about your area?
Both what the two previous answers fit well with us too. The other element, I guess, is I'm a dad of 3 kids, and we have most of our life gone the public school route, and I feel like that has connected us to a lot of families that are unchurched. And so just going through parenting with other people and taking advantage of opportunities, maybe if my kids are in sports or a school activity of some kind, just that seems to always open the door for conversation. And I usually don't lead with, hey, I'm a pastor. I just want to build the friendships and the relationships first, and that seems to go a long ways. That's
great. Good. Hey, how about Cassandra? Now, you're part of the Amango Day group. Tell us about, it looks like you're not with Amango Day guys right now. You're at home, it looks like, Cassandra.
Yeah, I'm at home.
Yeah. Can you share anything from your insight on how you think you can learn more about the community that you're called to? I assume are you in Downey right now, or are you from home?
I live in Whittier, which is about 2 cities over from Downey. But yeah, I've learned a lot from Edwin, who is our family life director, with the hat right there. It's just encouraging because I'm very shy by nature. And yeah, just being out and being willing to talk to people, greet them when you're in your community. And then we have tons of teachers in our school. So I volunteered with one of the local teachers who works in Southgate, where I believe they took you, just to get to know some of the school staff, the teacher's aide, her students. And it was just my way of trying to be involved in the community by serving in her classroom alongside with her. Because, I work for a church, so it's hard to be in the community.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I think that that's how I learned a lot about our neighborhood is volunteering in my kids' school. My kids were young, and just meeting a bunch of people from the neighborhood. And that's sort of a microcosm. I mean, when you go to an elementary school, it's all just in that neighborhood. And I got to meet so many families in that way. So Cassandra, I think that's a great way to get to know your community, is volunteering in the schools. Excellent. Let's have one more. Kent. Is Kent still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. Hey, tell us about, so you've been in Bakersfield, your church planting in Bakersfield, pretty big area. It's pretty spread out, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how long have you been there? And then tell us about how you're learning about the community.
Yeah, so Bakersfield's interesting for me because I grew up actually in a small town outside Bakersfield. So I've known Bakersfield for like many, many years. I also did youth ministry here. So I had a pretty good inkling of what we were walking into. So like soft data was not a problem. I had stories, but I would say I didn't know a lot of maybe it's bad to say, I didn't know a lot of non-Christians. I knew a lot of Christians. I knew the Christian culture in Bakersfield. So I think one, just getting to know more people. So kids sports, my daughter just started kindergarten. We put her in soccer before the pandemic, right? And so we had one season, and just meeting people, having conversations, getting to know non-Christians, but also like we went after hard data. Like what does it look like? Who is around us, getting a big bird's eye view of our community. And I share statistics with people who've lived in Bakersfield the whole life, and they're shocked. Like 550,000 people live in the greater Bakersfield area. I mean, it just, people don't, we're the biggest little town, like everyone knows everybody, but there's a huge growing population. And so we're a big family town. Anyways, getting to know people, but also looking at the hard data.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you so much for that. I just built a list. I was thinking about some of this. How do we get to know our communities? And I thought if you want to get involved in the Chamber of Commerce, that's a business center. I mean, it's maybe the economic powerhouse of the community, and so get involved in the Chamber of Commerce, which I did, which was really fascinating to get to know the business people. If your city has a historical society, there's usually like a historical club or something like that. So you can get sort of the beginnings of the city. Who were the city founding fathers and mothers, and what was the church history like? That's always really fascinating. And it kind of informs you of, as a church begins and you have a DNA of a church and the beginnings of it, the city kind of has that feel too. And so to get to know the beginnings of the city and the DNA of that city, there's some fascinating things about our city, about churches that got started. I think what David talked about, going to that third place, the Starbucks, the barbershop, that sort of a thing, and talk with people or listen with people. Listening is a real key, I think. Of course, reading the local news, if you have a throwaway paper that people write in, they do advertising. Get involved with first responders, police and fire. In the city of Torrance, where I'm at, I've been a police chaplain for 28 years. And to get to know those guys and to get to know the hurts of the city through law enforcement has been fantastic. Go to the senior centers. I haven't done that, but I heard a church planter doing that. Goes to the senior centers and sits with seniors. And these are the old timers. And so these are the people who've lived in the city or the region for a long time, and they love to talk. They love to have you listen, and they'll tell stories of the old days, and they'll show you pictures and things like that. Get a map of the city. So just Google. You can get on Amazon and type in your city or your region, and they'll send you, and you buy a map and put it up on your wall, and you can look at the actual geographic area of your city. Another great way, and I think this is fantastic, is define the boundaries and then get a leadership core, a leadership team, or just the intercessors of your church and do a prayer walk around the boundaries of the community that you're called to. And as they go around and pray, just have them take some time in silence and just meditate and seek God, and then get everyone back together and then just talk about what did they observe when they went through the prayer walk. Who were the people that they saw? What did they see during that prayer walk is a good thing. And then the last one I want to tell you about is at EFCA West, we have a free resource for you, and it's called Mission Insight. And it's a demographic report that's customized to whatever address you choose, and then you say, give me a 2-mile radius around that address, and then we'll plug those numbers in, and it'll generate a report, a demographic report for your community, and we'll send it to you. And it's a free resource that we have, and I'll tell you how to get that a little bit later. But if you want that, it's fantastic, and we'll talk about that in a second. I want to do this. I want to talk about, some of you guys have already kind of talked a little bit about the unique needs of your community. And so I want to talk about something called the local predicament. Let me check my time here. Okay, we're going to speed it up a little bit. Now, Sochi sent you a document if you registered for this, and she sent it, it's sitting in your email box, and it explains the local predicament. The local predicament is something that Will Mancini came up with in his book, Church Unique. And it's how we train church planters in something called the kingdom concept. Now, Sochi, could you share that screen with us here? Perfect, that's so good. In the upper right corner, you'll see this thing. It says kingdom concept. There's 3 circles there. On the left side, it says the local predicament. We'll talk about that in a second. On the circle on the right on the top, it says collective potential. So the collective potential for Church Unique, thank you, Sochi, is is assessing the talents and gifts of your leadership core. And this is the collective potential that God has brought your church plant to help meet the local predicament. And on the bottom circle, it's the apostolic esprit. And so what we're trying to key in on here is with your church, what is the local predicament? So what's the community you've been called to, and what are the hurts and the needs of that community? And then how did God gather your leadership core, or the giftedness and the talents of your church, to meet the needs of the local predicament? And then the apostolic esprit is, what is your church passionate for to meet those local predicament needs? And what you have in there is, as these circles fit together, the middle is called the kingdom concept. But let's talk about the local predicament right now. This is how we train church planters in this kingdom concept. But the local predicament it says your community has all kinds of specific challenges. And defining your local predicament answers the question, what are the unique needs and opportunities where God has placed us? Now, here's a bunch of questions here that help you to define what your local predicament is. It's what are the unique needs where God's placed us in our city and our neighborhoods? How are those needs reflected socially, economically, ethnically, environmentally, politically, and religiously? Such a good question. What arena of our community is the farthest from the utopia God wants to restore? So that's a kingdom of God restoration question. What special opportunities are found within our immediate, maybe a half-mile sphere of influence? And you're going to know that if you get that mission insight report. What burning issues are alive in the public's eye and brought to attention by the media? And then it just goes on and on. These are such great questions. The way we tackled this at Nova Community Church is that we have a meeting, a group called the Leadership Collective. And so for us, it's about 100 people that we invite into a special worship service about once every quarter. We haven't met because of the pandemic. But we got them together. I talked to them a little bit about how to think about the local predicament. And we broke people up into groups of 10 and gave them one of those big white pieces of paper that stick on the wall, the sticky note, but big ones, and a Sharpie. And then they just brainstormed because they live in the community. They just brainstormed and thought and discussed what are the needs of our local area. And so they started writing all these things down. And then we brought them all back together. And each of the groups had a spokesperson that presented what they thought their local predicament was. And boy, did you see a lot of blending. And those blended ideas is what we wrote down and said, this is our local predicament. So you can stop sharing that screen, Sochi, so we can see everybody in here. Now, I'm going to get back to Amango Day, guys. Now, how would you describe, let's just kind of key in on Southeast LA or Downey. How would you describe the local predicament of the Southeast LA area? And you may want to bring Memo or Eric or Edwin or Chrisandra in on this. But how would you describe that? Just tell us a little bit about what you think that Southeast LA area bleeds for.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I'll give a quick overview, and then I'll let these guys chime in. And Chrisandra, if you want to, you can, but you don't need to feel pressure. Dean already put you outside your comfort zone.
Sorry.
Well, I love it. So yeah, Southeast LA is like a geographic area. We're in Downey, it's a city of 115,000, but honestly, and we drove around with Dean, it's a network of cities, Southgate, Maywood, Bell Gardens, Cudahy, Paramount, Bellflower, Pico de Vera, Linwood, Norwalk. And I list all those cities because my guess is, you haven't heard of those. Most of you, if you're not from this area. And we're surrounded by freeways. We're not the beach. We're not Hollywood. So when you think of LA, that's not who you think of. But if you combine and you just drive the streets and you just enter from one city to the next without really noticing it, and they're all compact, we're all right together. It's 1.2 million people, which is like one of the largest cities in the United States as its own. And what happened is this is the area where white flight happened in the 70s and then like another wave of it in the 90s. And that's where, as an immigrant population moved in, a lot of white people moved to North Orange County, to the Inland Empire, to other parts of Southern California. And that brought like a wave of businesses, of churches, of government stuff where there were scandals, there were businesses that failed because you just took a community and they left, and you know. But now that it's been 20 years, and in some cases 30, 40 years, there's a resurgence. I mean, people are resilient, communities find their way, and you're seeing what's really cool is new waves of new businesses, new art, new government, new like things that are happening, and trying to meet needs. And you're not seeing a wave of new churches, at least English-speaking Protestant churches, gospel churches. Not just kind of like the broad picture of the predicament. And if you guys can speak, kind of what's maybe thing that you see that's an issue in our area, that's more unique.
Wow. Yeah. So I think one of the things, as Bishop was referring, there is this, how I describe it is kind of like this, not a very clear understanding of the good news. What I mean by that is there's a spirituality that is in this area, but people don't really know who God is. People belong to, or they grow up with a religious tradition, but they don't understand the gospel per se. What creates is a confusion about who God is, and that exists in the world, but specifically in DC because my background. I was born in Mexico, came here. No one wants to be indoctrinated by a religion opposed to your own background. And so the approach that churches have had on people is kind of like, is offer this better option instead of a clear understanding of who God is to them.
Yeah.
And so again, for us, is to cultivate a good gospel clarity has been challenging, but on the other hand, it's like been fruitful because we begin to present the people the truth of the gospel. And we say, hey, Jesus is better than anything else you could ever see. And we want you to know that. And so people kind of, they're a little resistant in the beginning, but as they begin to understand and hear the good news through the grace of God, people begin to respond. God just up in their hearts. But again, it's hard ground. And so it takes a little bit of cultivation. As Dean was reminding us, we're not here for a year or 2 years. We're here for a long haul because it's going to take us a long time to begin to plant the seeds, scatter the seeds, and disciple people into the truth.
So it's you think Los Angeles, you think maybe liberal, you think new agey. I don't know. That's not our area at all. It's actually a very religious area. You can talk to any single person you meet, and they'll have an opinion on speaking in tongues or the rapture or tithing, but they don't know the gospel at all. And so that creates actually a really tough ground in some ways because it's like people think they know and they have no idea. And it's not a very church area, even as it is a very religious area. Correct. It's a really kind of weird marker. Anything to add to that, Eric?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to be here, Dean. And I think seeing Alex Rivero, I don't know if that was the person I spoke to over the phone, but it's been a blessing. This is such a blessing for me because one of the things in the Spanish community in churches, I'm coming from that church where it was more about prosperity gospel, like word of faith and all that. As Memo was saying, this area, all the Spanish people that goes to a Christian church, they don't really know the sound doctrine. And one of the challenges of what God put in my heart is to get out of there and learn the proper gospel. And one of the things that I'm super thankful with God is that he put me right here with these people. You know, they're guiding me. They're changing my mind to be a church planter. You know, we've been with Mira for 2 years, and I've been connected with Imago Day for the last 8 months, and it's been a blessing for us, you know, for us as a church. But also one of the things that Latino churches in this area, they don't really think as a church planting. It's more like doing things by themselves, not having connections, not having no one to help them. That's why you have like the small churches right there, not growing up, not having a vision out there. It's more internal stuff, you know. So we kind of going against that. That's what we, you know, that's in our hearts, and I'm blessed for that, you know.
That's so awesome. I think that's great. Hey, we're not going to do the second breakout, but I thought we'll just talk about it in the big group right here. Can some of you share what you would consider the local predicament of your community? Anyone else would like to share how they see one of the areas of local predicament in their community? Let's hear from the Tucson guys and Randy and David over there. What do you guys think? As you think, you've been there in Tucson for how long, Randy?
Yeah, I moved here from New York in 1979, so a long time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But local predicament, man, I would say we have a list up on our whiteboard of things we feel like are the needs and the predicaments of our community. Certainly, drugs kind of go across any kind of generation, any kind of social economic position. We're kind of post-church. It's interesting to hear you talk about Downey. Most people really, they just want nothing to do with the church, and so we kind of have to overcome that. But a lot of you guys were talking about, a lot of people are struggling in their marriages or parenting, so being a part of the public school or being a coach for YMCA. Dave also is a chaplain of our local police department. And so that's been kind of our connection points. And for Tucson specifically, it's pretty weak in like just jobs for people. And so I would say the economy in Tucson's not awesome. In Phoenix, it's incredible, but in Tucson, it's people who graduate from U of A. And again, we're a college town, so we have kind of a real, I don't know, I'd say a liberal bend, and then everybody moves away for jobs. So that's kind of, I think, our predicament. Would you add anything, Dave? He's saving this stuff for the end.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. Hey, over at Amango Day, guys, we didn't hear from Edwin. I want to hear Edwin because he's the family pastor guy over there. Hey, Edwin.
Yeah. What's up, guys? I think one of the things that we see is that even within the community in our community is Downey is unique. It has. I grew up in the Valley. I'm not a Downey person. I've been here for about 3 years now. So I'm learning every day about the city. But one thing that was so quickly obvious to me was grew up in the Valley, and that's like majority Hispanic and low poverty. Every Hispanic speaks Spanish. Over here, man, you got a mixture of Hispanic population. You have wealthy Hispanics, you have poor Hispanics, and you have a generation that doesn't speak Spanish, and they look straight up like they just crossed the border, and they don't speak any Spanish. They speak perfect English. So it's like, so that kind of threw me off as just looking at like the diversity within the Spanish community, like with the economy, and even just also. So how to connect both of that? So building relationship with that different, the different, kind of the diversity in our church. Like one of the things we try to emphasize is that diversity is like one of the things that stick out in our church is like we have people from all over, different race, different financial standards, and like it's been a blessing. So one of the things that we try to emphasize is like how do we remove those barriers, you know, where they become friends and they can learn from one another and they can bless one another, and that's something that we try to push towards.
That's so good. I mean, I think that's one of the key things. We talked about that in our community. We have different socioeconomic status amongst people, and that creates barriers sometimes. You're absolutely right, Edwin, and ethnicity does too, and try to build bridges for those barriers and tear down those walls is really great. Yeah, I just wanted to give some takeaways to this this webinar, and just things that we talked about that I want you to think about further. And I'd love to have further conversations with any of you in these areas. But one of the first things we talked about is, what are the boundaries of the area that God has called you to? And I think a lot of times, sometimes we just get into a church and we're not thinking really, what is that community that God has called us to? And the more you can zero in on that, the more you can understand it and know the stories of the people, and then discover what that local predicament is all about. And I think that'll sharpen your ministry a lot. And then what's the story for your community? I think we talked about how we can find out what those stories are, but really it's about listening. It's about connection with people and about listening. And I think that's good. Alex put up on the chat box, another great area, a way to know your community is through parks and recreation, and to be able to volunteer at a park or for a sports team or something like that is always great. And then what's the local predicament? And as you get to know people, you get to know your community, you'll listen, you'll start to hear where your community's bleeding, where it hurts, and how the gospel can make a difference in that community. The Amango Day guys talked a lot about making that gospel clear and having clarity in that gospel proposition. And how do we do that? Not just preaching, but living out and connecting with people. And I think that's really, really great. We talked about that mission insight report so that you can get to know your community through statistics. And if you want to get that mission insight report, it's a free resource. It's a great, great resource. What you could do is send an email, start with sending an email to efcawest at efca.org. It's up in the chat box right there. And just say, I want to get a mission insight report for my area. And you'll need to provide an address, the ground zero, and then decide. I would probably go with like a 1 mile, 2 mile radius of that address. And then anyways, just start with efcawest at efca.org to ask for that mission insight report. The other thing is that's going to come to you. It's going to be a pretty large document that's going to come to you. And as that comes to you, you'll read through it, and you'll need someone to kind of help you interpret that. And if you'd like me to help you to interpret that, then shoot me an email. And my email address is dean.mayeda@efca.org. So dean.mayeda@efca.org. And shoot me an email and let's connect. And so in all these things, I love to help you develop a strategy to reach your community. And so let's connect. Drop me an email. I'd love to come out visit you. And only if you take me out to getting 18-hour smoked Chipotle brisket burritos. We can eat in a park, and you can drag me around your community. And I'd love to meet with you guys and to talk about multiplying the gospel in your communities. I want to thank you so much, especially the Amango Day guys, DJ and Memo and Edwin and Chrisandra and Eric. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. This has been great. Thank you all for being a part. And this is recorded. It'll be up later on this week. Thanks for joining us today. And reach out to me if you want to talk about church multiplication. See you guys.